Well, welcome everyone to our second lecture, Researching Consumer Food Preferences. You see that we have a new addition to class. We have someone, a camera person. They're on loan doing their judge-appointed community service, so please don't make eye contact with the prisoner. Is Lindsay Jones here? Lindsay, that's for you. I saw in your info sheet that you show pigs competitively. You know, where I grew up in South Carolina, where at least in the low country, we didn't have showing. You didn't show animals. Some people did horses, but not livestock, and I didn't know what it was. And, you know, when I first found out about it, when I went to school, I did a master's at Kansas State, and people talking about showing animals, and so many people grew up showing animals, and I'm like, you mean like they do dogs, like in a dog show? And they're like, yeah, but don't talk about it like that. I always thought people in Oklahoma would be big rodeo people. I know I saw some people rodeo here. Raise your hand if you rodeoed. Yeah, so one thing I knew about rodeo stars is when you win a rodeo, you win a big belt buckle with engraving on it. And so when I got here, my first year advising students, all these freshmen would come in with these huge belt buckles. And I was thinking, wow, these are all rodeo stars. And all these people won rodeos. And I didn't know it at first because you don't stare at a person's crotch to see what rodeo they won. But eventually I learned, as you can tell where I'm getting to, these were all winning of shows. I was a little bit disappointed, but then I got to understand shows a little better, and I kind of get it now. I'll tell you, I had a friend without an ag background who moved from Minnesota down here, and he was an appraiser, where you go out and you figure out the value of certain land. And he went to this one farm to appraise a building, and it was a barn. And there was this one room he needed to go in and look at, and this was in July. And he opened the door, and a blast of cold air came out. So it was some kind of refrigerator of sorts, but it was dark. He couldn't see what was in there. And so he went and he turned on the lights, and what do you think he saw? Cows. So he opened up this huge refrigerator, and he saw cows inside, and it kind of freaked him out. Like, what kind of psychopath? He didn't know anything about shows. He's thinking, what kind of psychopath is keeping cows in a refrigerator? And he called me. By then I knew enough to tell him that they were getting their cows pretty. They wanted long, pretty hair for the show, and that's what was going on. So he understood it a little better then. Kylie Carroll, are you here? You don't like onions at all. What about that awesome blossom that we discussed in last? You don't even like that? Huh. Kaylee Brassfield. Okay, you're starting to watch Ozark. That's one of my favorite shows on Netflix. Now, the Jason Bateman, the star on there, I'm going to make a Netflix recommendation for you if you've never seen it. I believe the funniest show that's ever been produced was a show starring Jason Bateman called Arrested Development. That first came out when you were just being born, but it's all on Netflix. I think it's the funniest thing that's ever existed. So there you go. You can watch 2 Jason Bateman series. Okay, what we're going on, let me start off with some of the announcements. My plans for every class is to do like I've done today, where I give handouts and like worksheets and slides so that you can take notes on that. If I want you to just take notes of something I'm doing on the blackboard or something, I'll let you know. What we're going to do first is we're going to review some concepts from last class, and then we're going to go in and discuss that reading of the Panoramic Fog. Now, one thing you're going to see in this class is, at first it's going to feel like we're all over the board. And in a sense we are. I'm going to show, there's going to be slides, and I'm going to say, this is from these pages of the textbook. That's way in the back. The textbook being just that one chapter. And then there'll be, I'm just going to check this camera real quick because it zoned out last time. There'll be other times when it's like the first page or so. And just to let you know what we're doing there is, you know, when you first learn to play a sport, let's say softball, baseball, what they don't do is first give you a series of lectures on like how to bat. Then they don't move you to first base and show you how to do that. Then they don't move you to second base. The first thing they do is you just to start playing. You got to get a game you got to get a sense of the game as a whole. And then once you understand the game as a whole, then you start having batting practice and things like that. So that's what we're doing here. We're starting off giving you a glimpse of kind of the panoramic view, the big view at once, and then we'll start going at and looking at much more specific things. Know that homework 2 grades, they're not going to automatically appear. No one has a grade listed yet. Once they're all in, I got to go into Canvas and put hundreds for you. Thank you for giving me all the specific things. You know, it's just the one way I don't get to spend much time with you, and I want to get to know you. And so that's one way for me to do it. Homework 1 grades, you know, all of them are low right now because there were some essay questions that I go in and hand grade. So your grades will go up, presumably. I do want students to do things in on time, so when students don't put in on time, I give them an extra assignment. If you didn't have homework 1 done by the start of today's class, there's a link there. I want you to go listen to a Planet Money podcast that's relevant to preferences for things, and I'll do a 500-word summary of it and email it to me. I'm not going to grade the writing. I just want to know that, just in the writing, I want to know that I want to read it and know that you listen to the whole podcast. And do it within, 1 week. Anything we need to chat about before we start? Okay, so what I'm now doing, I'm going to the slides, and at first, I'm simultaneously completing the worksheet and going over the slides. Meaning this is question 1 on the worksheet. Where at first we're going to be talking a good bit about this thing called market share. It's a simple concept, but I want to make sure you understand what I mean by market share. And so we're starting off with this little example here where we say, we suppose we have Palm Olive, that dishwashing liquid that sells for 10,000 units, Dawn, which sells for 15,000, Joy, which sells for 17,000 units, and Eco Plus, it sells for 5,000 units. What's the market share of Eco Plus in terms of units sold? You could do market shares in terms of like revenue from each one, but in this example, I only give you quantities. So if we're going to calculate a market share of Eco Plus in terms of units sold, how do you think we'd calculate that? You can answer specifically or in general terms. You have any ideas, Lindsay? Yeah, well, you got it. That's exactly what you do. We know we sold 5,000 units of Eco Plus, and so we want to say, what's the market share? I've only given you 4 different products here, and so you calculate all the products that were sold: 10,000 of Palm Olive plus 15,000 of Dawn plus 17,000 of Joy plus 5,000 of Eco Plus. And when you do that, you get 0.1064 or 10.64%. Meaning, of all the dishwashing liquid items sold, Eco Plus was about 11% of it. That's going to be important because we're going to be talking about market share and some of the other things. Simple concept, but I want to make sure you understand it. All right. I talked about an example last time of an experiment I did. I said it kind of fast to give you an example of something. Probably didn't get it all, so I'm bringing it up here in more detail. And I'm also showing you one way that we sometimes do experiments. Notice up here, and I want you, there's going to be things up here, and I want you to add that to your slides. So this is a particular way of measuring food preferences, and there's something like this in figure 13.4 of the textbook excerpts. Does it see in the camera me standing down here if it looks okay? Okay. This is where, so suppose we're going to sell this new Eco Plus dishwashing liquid, and we want to know, will people pay a premium for it? So what I did in this research is I invited people, I recruited people from the community, they came to this classroom, and I gave them a question like this. I said, and actually had the dishwashing detergents there for them to look at as well. And I said, suppose you could sell Palmolive, you went to the store and you sell Palmolive for $3, Dawn for $3, Joy dishwashing liquid for $3, and Eco Plus for $4. And I said, at those prices, if you were in the grocery store, which would you purchase? And we had a none option there because if someone doesn't buy these things regularly, I probably don't want to know their preferences for it, because if they're not customers, I don't want them just guessing what they would purchase. I want to get an idea of what real consumers would say, real consumers of dishwashing liquid. And what they do is they check one of these, and I put all the results together, and that tells me, from that I can get an idea of what market shares would be like. Because just like in this example, this is like real units sold. Well, in that survey question, there's like units sold as well, right? It's hypothetical. It's in survey questions, but I can still calculate the market share of Eco Plus sold from that survey. And that's what you do a lot in surveys. Now, on the worksheet here, we're going to be talking about 3 different types of questions. And it says for questions 2 to 4, use each of the following 3 answers only once. 14, 1, 0. And to figure out what the answer would be there, I'm going to show you what number 2 was as well. So in addition to saying which dishwashing liquid would you purchase, we want to ask, if you were in the store, give us your best guess, what do you think the average shopper would purchase at those prices? So would the average shopper pay the $1 premium for the Eco Plus being an environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid? And then remember that Eco Plus had never been sold in Stillwater, so it was a novel product. And after I did the surveys, I went and put it on sale at the store that used to be where Sprouts is now, and I had the dishwashing liquids at these prices. And then I calculated the actual market share. So 3 questions. What was the market share based on what people said they would do, based on what people said other people would do, and then what actually happened? So based on what people said they would do you think the predicted market share for the environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid selling at a premium would be 14%, 1%, or 0%? It's okay to give a wrong answer. What's that? 14? I can't tell who's answering these questions. Okay, 14. Yeah, the answer is 14%. Based on what people said they would do, the predicted market share was 14%. So if you're a company trying to see if you can sell this environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid at a premium, a pretty hefty premium, $3 to $4, that's a pretty big premium relative-wise, and you do this survey, it says, well, you'll have 14% of the market here. But that's what people say they will do. Then we ask, what do you think other people would do? And based on that predicted market share, people predicting what other people do, you think the predicted market share is 1 or 0%? They're pretty close, so you'll be right either way. 1. The predicted market share was 1%. And that means the actual market share was 0%. And so this is related to some things we discussed yesterday. What we're trying to do with consumer preference methods is figure out what people will do in stores from surveys and focus groups, but we've got to be smart about what, how we interpret people's answers. What does Dr. House always say? Everybody lies, at least somewhat, except yours truly. And notice this will come up in a little bit. This is a direct question, meaning I'm asking what will you do? This is an indirect question. The direct question is like, I want to know something. Indirect question is, I have this friend who's wondering, asking for a friend. That's like an indirect question. You know, you're trying to take yourself out of it. And so the answer to 2, 3, and 4 is 14%, 1%, and 0%. Another thing about how we answer questions, well, I'll do that slide in a minute. The next two questions concern two different types of biases we talked about: social desirability bias and acquiescence bias. Number 5 says, in the EcoPlus experiment, some consumers said they would indeed pay more money for an environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid, but in reality, no one did. They misrepresented their true willingness to contribute towards the environment. This is an example of, you don't necessarily know these words today, but does this sound like something that's acquiescence bias or social desirability bias? Yeah. It sounds like social desirability bias, and that's what it is. You're misrepresenting who you really are to make yourself seem better to other people. It's like there's you on your Tinder account and there's you at home. Two different people, sometimes two different pictures. Then we have this thing called acquiescence bias. So suppose we approach this idea of this dishwashing liquid in another way. Suppose we ask people in a survey. We give them this statement, say, do you agree or disagree? One statement says, I'm willing to pay a higher price for dishwashing liquid that is environmentally friendly. Do you agree or disagree? And suppose that 60% of people agree. 60% of people say, yes, I will pay a premium for environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid. Well, that means how many people say they won't? 40, right. So 40% of people disagreed, saying they won't pay a higher price. But then we go to an almost identical sample and we ask them this question. It's the same question, but this thing called valence is reversed. The disposition, the tone is reversed. Here we say, I am not willing to pay a higher price for dishwashing liquid that is environmentally friendly. Now, based on the first question, what percent of people would we expect to agree? 40, right? But instead, if you did a question like this, you would get something like 50%. And the reason is, when most people are answering this question, it's a vague question to start with, right? Well, what premium are we talking about? Does the dishwashing liquid work well? So the question's vague, and so you don't really know what the answer is. And when people are unsure of the answer, they just prefer to agree or disagree. And so you can ask something that's the same basic question, and people just prefer to agree. So a lot of times, if we wanted to do a real survey to figure out people's real willingness to pay for premium for environmental dishwashing liquids, what we'll do on surveys is we'll ask half the people this question, and half the people that question. And we would then conclude what percent of people say they will actually pay a premium for environmentally friendly dishwashing liquid? 50 to 60%. We wouldn't base our answer off just one survey question because there's no one answer out there. It actually depends on how you ask the question. And that's what we call acquiescence bias. And so answer number 6 is acquiescence bias. Remember, you're going to have to do a paper where you design a research program to evaluate a new product. And so you got to figure out things like, are we going to ask questions like this? Am I going to use a survey? If I'm going to use a survey and ask questions like this, I've got to be smart and make sure I ask it both ways. Acquiescence bias. Too late on the click. Hardest thing about this, spelling acquiescence on the test. But the test is online. Won't be any problem with that. 30% of you will spell it wrong anyway. Spell check will tell you it's wrong. You'll spell it wrong anyway. And what do we do when something goes wrong in these days? What do we blame it on? COVID. If you spell a word wrong, I've got COVID. This is from a survey I did. So maybe one of you, for your product, you want to sell maybe something that's considered a more humane meat. There's one pig farmer, like not show pig farmer. I didn't mean to put in parentheses. But like a big-time pig farmer, was there? Okay, well, anyway. In one survey, this was something I did with Farm Bureau, where we were curious about what people thought about the animal welfare issue. And for half of people, we did this. We said, we gave them a statement. And we said, I consider the well-being of farm animals when I make decisions about purchasing meat. And we asked whether they agree or disagreed with that question, and these are the results. These are over 500 Americans, representative sample, a good sample. So 50% of people basically agreed. So 50% of people telling us when they go to the store to buy meat, they account for the treatment of the well-being of the farm animals. Does that sound realistic? No. Of course they don't. They don't. People don't do that. There's maybe 5% of people who really do that, right? But when you're asked whether you do that, if you say no, that makes you sound crude, right? It's kind of like saying, well, I don't care about the animals. I just buy what I want. That's what we really do for the most part, but we don't like to say it like that. And so, this question to me doesn't really tell us, it may tell us what people want to be or how they like to project themselves, but it doesn't tell us what they really are. And in this, what we're doing, number 7 now, it says, suppose you wish to know the extent to which people account for the treatment of farm animals when making their food purchases, but you are fearful there will be social desirability bias, just like we certainly see there, where even those who don't care about animal welfare will be reticent to admit it. How can you ask such a question while avoiding social desirability bias? How do we do it with the dishwashing liquid? Yeah, instead of me asking you, do you care about farm animals and whether the sows are in gestation crates, whether the chickens are happy? Do you think the average American? Because what you know is that people want to make themselves look good, but we don't really care about making other people look good. And so what do you think? So we did this here. We also asked the other half of people this statement. We gave them this statement. The average American considers the well-being of farm animals when they make decisions about purchasing meat. What do you think happened to that percent who agree? Up or down? Down. Any guesses? How far down do you think it went to? 10? Any others? You're probably trying to answer, it's just not getting through the mask. I totally get it. Because usually students love to answer questions like this, especially ones they know they're not going to be right. They're not going to get it exact on. 10%, that's probably be about what I'd guess. 21%. I mean, I think that's pretty close. So, at first, people, half of people say, well, of course, I care about animals when I'm purchasing beef and pork and stuff like that. And so we say, no, you don't. You lie. So we ask this other question instead. But they say, well, only 21% of other people care, really. So now we're getting a little closer to the truth, probably. And 21% might be too high. It depends on how you interpret this question. And these kind of questions can be hard to interpret. That's the hard thing about surveys. And so our answer there for number 7 is we ask, this is an indirect question. So we can ask this question indirectly to get around social desirability bias. When the first time Hillary Clinton was running for president, and people want to know, would Americans vote for, would they support a woman for president? They knew they couldn't ask people that because people didn't want to admit it if they didn't want a woman to be president. So they used indirect questioning instead. There's a number of other tricks you can do. Well, this is the only one we're going to cover. Just my favorite. Kind of like saying, William, do you lie on your Tinder account? Don't act like you don't got Tinder. Do you think the average person lies on their Tinder account? Yep. Yep, that's all we're doing here. So most of this stuff, this is the science of researching consumer preferences, but there's no specialized knowledge. You know this stuff. You just have to encounter it in a certain way that you know how to use it and that you can recall it when you need it. That's one reason I like teaching this class. You know, when you teach intro and you start doing those total variable cost, average variable cost curves, there's no intuition there. It's hard, but this kind of stuff you can really get intuitively. Here's another bias that we tend to find. That when a lot of times, people rush through surveys. And if we gave this question where we said, okay, at these prices, which dishwashing liquid would you buy? A lot of people sometimes will kind of choose the first item on the list. Maybe they're rushing through it, maybe they don't really know. And so we might find that the predicted market share for Palmolive is higher than it really would be if it was located over here. Is that kind of intuitive? Yeah, kind of the first one. I mean, you look at it, yeah, that sounds like one I'd buy, sure. You may not even know the one you actually buy at the store, but it's the first one there, so sure. Well, we want to make sure our overall results don't give Palmolive too much market share just because it was the first one on the list. So how can we avoid that? You rotate them. Yep. You randomize it. You do something like this. You give, in an internet survey, this is really easy because every internet survey now comes with the option where you can randomize things. And if you're doing it on paper, you just have to send out different versions of surveys to people. So what you do here is, one subject will get one, and the subject just means person taking the surveys. We don't want to acknowledge their people, and so we just call them subjects. The other one puts Palmolive near the last. The other one has Palmolive here. The other one has Palmolive there. So even if maybe 10% of people are just checking the first one no matter what, the overall results are not affected by the order bias. Meaning when we crunch the total market share over everyone, whatever order bias is there is affecting each one equally. Now I kept none here. Does that seem like the right thing to do? Yeah, I do. I think so too. You have an idea why? It's I like it there too. I don't really have an articulate way of saying it, but it just seems like none should stay in the same place and be over there. It just would seem weird if you started scattering none around. And a lot of constructing surveys is just looking at the questions the way you're doing it and say, does that seem right? And so the answer you need to put there is, however you want to word it, you randomize the order in which the items are listed. We do this whether it's an internet survey or even if we're having people do taste tests. I do a lot of taste test work. Like, for instance, I've done a lot with pecans. I have people taste different types of pecans and to see which one they like best, and I always vary the order in which they take it. Order matters, and it's so easy to get rid of that bias just by randomizing things. Okay. Give you another idea of some of the kind of things to do. This is an example of some kind of taste test design we could do. This is number 9. We have, number 9 says, a company is developing an alternative recipe for its salad dressing. It's who's the one who hates ranch dressing? Okay. They're trying to come up with a ranch dressing that doesn't make you throw up in your mouth, basically. Okay. It's similar to the original recipe, but uses fresher and more expensive ingredients. So this is going to really work for you. To explore what consumers think of the new recipe relative to the original recipe, they have consumers taste spoonfuls from an unmarked container alternating whether the subjects taste the original or the new recipe first. So what you do is you take these ranch dressings, presumably they look similar. Otherwise, you can change the lighting in the room to make them look similar or have them blindfolded or something, but don't worry about that. You put the salad dressings in 2 containers. You give them numbers, like 384 and 638. Not A and B. Why not A and B? Yeah. Well, you can vary which one is A and B. But I think the main reason is that which sounds better, an A or a B? A. I mean, we don't want to work for an A, but we want an A in class, right? All right? And so things that say A just sound better, and we don't want that influence in people's result. But what sounds better, 384 or 638? So that's what you're trying to do with that. Because 6 may sound better than 3, because usually a higher number is better. And so you give them these numbers just to mask all that, not influence the results. And then you have them just taste 1 spoonful of each one. You vary. Half the people taste the original recipe first, half the people taste the new one first. And then you do this thing called hedonic scales, where you say, check how much you like it, from dislike extremely to like extremely. It's balanced in that there's a middle, neither like nor dislike. There's an equal number of likes to dislikes, and so they check it. 9A says, if we're doing this, and here's the important thing, the company wants to know which dressing the consumer would like better. Is there anything wrong with using this method? And when the prof asks that, that means there's always something wrong. Think back to last lecture. Ooh, I like this competition. Okay, who wants it more? What's your name? Adrian, okay. You're right. Is that what you were going to say? What were you going to say?
If they want to know which one they like better, I mean, they could kind of like one a little bit more than the other, and that's not very straightforward because that's not saying they dislike either one of them.
Oh, you mean they could just like check?
Yeah, I feel like if they want to know which one they like better, the scale is kind of like misleading.
Okay, yeah, why don't you just ask which one you like better or something like that? Yeah. If we relate this back to the new Coke versus old Coke thing, the reason this is not a very good way is because that's not how people eat salad dressings. And when you give people just small amounts of something, they tend to like what taste in it? Sweet. They're basically just going to respond to the sugar. And a lot of salad dressings, they don't taste that great when you just consume them by themselves. Barbecue sauce, of course, but not salad dressings. Like, take the ones with vinegar. They're really sharp and acidic, right? But they have a very different profile when you put them on lettuce. And so this is not a good method for saying which one they like better, because that's not how people eat it. They're going to mainly just respond to the sweetness. What you want to do is, how would you do to see what's a more realistic way of having them evaluated? Yeah. What do you got to make sure? So if you give them 2 salad bowls, say put salad on one, on the other, or how do we control things? Yeah, you got to make them the exact same somehow. I did this once with burgers. So anybody remember pink slime? What pink slime is? Okay, you do? Well, this was before you were born, but there was a thing where, we're able to take a carcass and we take these chunks called, I can't remember what they're called, but these chunks of fat and meat from cattle, and we put them in a centrifuge and we spin them around and we get the meat out. and we put something on it to make sure they're hygienic, and that's called finely textured beef. It got the name pink slime from bad media coverage of it, and we put it in with lean ground beef as a way of harvesting more of the carcass to get leaner beef, things like that. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But there was a time, the mid-90s, I think, when bad media came out about this. Consumers revolted. They had to get rid of it, but it's slowly coming back. But we wanted to do a study to see, does ground beef with pink slime taste better or worse? Companies were saying it tastes better. Consumers like it better. But of course they'd say that. They want to put it in it. And so we did taste tests to determine this. The first taste test, they would just consume little pieces of ground beef with and without finely textured beef. No salt, no pepper, or anything. And there we found a slight preference for beef with pink slime because it was more tender. But then what we did was said, well, let's make it a realistic eating experience. So we recruited lots of freshmen from the casual living learning community. We paid them $20 and gave them a free meal. They came in. We made hamburgers, sliders for them. And what we did, we said, okay, and we gave them ground beef patties, some with pink slime, some without. And they were differentiated by the color of the toothpick. And we said, okay, make 2 hamburgers, make them identical as possible. And we had monitors there watching what they were doing to make sure they made them as identical as possible. Had lots of toppings, so they could make it however they like to make it. And then we said, okay, first take a bite out of this one, then take a bite out of that one. Tell us how much you like them. They could not tell the difference at all. No difference at all. So that's a sample, just like you're talking about. Maybe we should have prepared the burgers in advance for them, but then we might not have made burgers the way they like it. And so there's an art to this, and you just got to use your common sense. So some of y'all may decide in your paper to do a new food product where you design a taste test like this. Now suppose we have a different type of experiment. Now all we want to know is whether they can taste the difference between the original and new recipe. And it's the same thing. We give them the dressings in unmarked containers. We have them take a spoonful of each and taste it. And then we just say, check whether you think they're the same or different. And you tell them, you have to do this, you have to say, okay, half of you got 2 of the exact same dressings, half of you got different ones. Tell us whether you think you got the ones that were the same or different. Now, if all we want to know is can consumers taste the difference between these 2 things, does that sound like an okay experiment? Raise your hand if you think so. You know, I'm always scared to do that. Raise your hand if you're too scared to raise your hand in class. No. To me, this is a perfectly fine setup. Even though it's an unrealistic eating experience, all we want to know is if they can tell the difference. And I can't imagine making it more realistic would give you any more insights into anything. It may make them less sensitive to differences, but if you really want to tell the difference between them, this is a good way. And companies do this all the time. Over at the Food and Ag Product Center, companies regularly hire them to conduct studies like this. Sometimes you'll be recruited to it. It's a pretty sweet deal. They give you $15 and you go in. One time it was to taste some differences in barbecue sauces. One time a coffee company bought a different machine to roast the coffee, and they wanted to make sure that this machine roasted coffee the exact same way so that consumers couldn't tell the difference. And they used these kind of experiments to see if it was the case. I made the experiment simpler. You'll learn about how you really do it, but it's basically like this. Truett Taylor here. You don't eat at Chipotle. How come?
I've just always heard bad things about Chipotle.
What have you heard? Besides massive diarrhea outbreaks.
Yeah, that, and I guess there was a scandal several years back, but I really don't know a lot about it. I just never go.
Chipotle, their main marketing strategy, they go towards like ethics a lot and food safety. they want to make themselves seem like they care more about the animals, they care more about your safety, that they're more natural, better from the environment. They want to be better on all fronts, is what we're doing. And so we're about to get into this thing called panoramic fog. Keep scratching my nose. COVID. And so we're starting to learn about consumer preferences for food when it has to do things with ethics that are pretty vague. Okay, a lot of times companies get a lot of flack because they love slapping that natural label on food, right? And it's mostly meaningless. Everything seems to be a natural food. But consumers also seem to respond to it, and we criticize food companies because the natural label is so superficial. I mean, there's nothing underneath it. But in fairness to the companies, a lot of consumer preferences are very superficial. There's nothing underneath it, and so what are they supposed to do? A lot of companies are selling foods, marketing foods to be more ethical, so if we're going to be in business, we have to think about how consumers will think about this. And this is something I added. What we're doing here, this is a substitute for industry experience. If you talk to people in industry, they understand this concept of panoramic fog and things like that. They won't use the words I did. It won't be so in-depth because they don't write papers about it, but they understand it. So a lot of times what we're doing in this class is a lecture is a poor substitute for industry experience. All right. And we're going to be looking at farmers. We're going to be thinking about the local foods movement. Local foods movement being a movement to encourage people to eat more locally produced food, not just because there's someone here who works for Carol Whitmore from Whitmore Farms. There you go. Boy, you really hit everything today. Yeah. Well, I buy from Connie. That's I buy lots of stuff from her. I love Connie's food, and I go there because I like her and I like the produce she raises. That's not the local foods movement. The local foods movement is things like me telling you should be buying more local foods, or we should mandate schools buy local foods for their cafeterias. If these two people are working under tunnel vision, and a reminder what tunnel vision is the capacity to play one's part in the great complex enterprise of creating the prosperity of a modern society without knowing or necessarily caring very much about the overall outcome. Don't you love how profs say things? If they're operating on tunnel vision, what do they have in common, the consumer and the producer? And I'll give you hints. I know the profs always ask these vague questions like you're supposed to know what they're thinking. They don't care about what? Or they're only looking out for who? Themselves. Okay. The farmer, just trying to make money, take care of their land. The consumer's just trying to get the food they want. They're not trying to achieve cosmic harmony. They're not saying, how does this affect everybody? That's what tunnel vision is. That's most of our lives. But a lot of times with food, like with Chipotle, what they're going after is like cosmic harmony to make sure the food is good for everybody. Not that these aren't. Okay. So I'm going to play a clip. This is from the documentary Locavore. These are people who are saying that we should always be consuming more and more local foods.
And another advantage of buying from your local farmer is economists call it the multiplier effect. And that's the number of times a dollar circulates in the community before it leaves the community. So when I go to the grocery store, somewhere between 10 and 15% of my dollar stays in the local community. The rest leaves because it has to pay the truckers, it has to pay the agribusiness giants and the warehouses over in Denver or where the remote warehouses. The money leaves the community. And if I spend the money with my local farmer, that guy, he pays his local property taxes, pays his school taxes, his kids go to the school. He goes down and spends the money at the local feed store, the local hardware store. He spends the money here in the community. It doesn't leave the community. And depending on who you talk with, that multiplier effect for agriculture in an agricultural community is 5 or 6. That means it's 5 times as effective as if you go to the supermarket and the money leaves the community. So it's really economic development.
Can you see the screen okay? Is it okay just having this one up? Okay. I'll, in the future, I'll put both down. I didn't think about that. All right, so what Mr. English there is, so he has an articulate, intelligent sounding defense of the local foods movement. You should buy more local foods because it increases the wealth of your community. And there's a lot of intuition there. Do you think John English is speaking truth, lie, or bullshit?
Bullshit.
Why do you say bullshit? What's the difference between bullshit and a lie?
Bullshit is when you think you are saying the right things, and lie is when you have a complete disregard for the truth.
You're probably thinking right, you just probably said it a little different, a little wrong. Anybody else?
With the bullshit, they just don't care to know the truth. Like, they feel good about their answers, so they're just believing it.
Yeah, bullshit is when you either don't care what the truth is or you don't know. Like when you give that book report on the book you've never read. You don't know what the book's about. You just stand up and you start saying things. That's the technical term bullshit in philosophy. Now, I'd agree with you that, and this is nothing against Mr. John English because, society forces us to bullshit all the time because we are constantly asked to have opinions on things we can't know much about. Politics, God, things like that. I mean, a lot of the truth is really hard for us to know, but we're expected to have beliefs and attitudes about it, right? And I hope the way I said that about God doesn't, I'm a Catholic, so, I'm right there. What I'm saying is that, have we ever met Jesus? No, but we have beliefs about, I better stop, okay. Okay, so let's go on. So, Mr. John English, we're all full of shit, bullshit. Well, why is Mr. John English probably full of shit here? Well, let's think. So how much does Mr. English probably actually know about how money and trade works? Well, let's think about this. Okay, well, if we're talking about exporting food, importing food as an exchange of money. And so let's start with this premise that, so he's saying money leaving a community is bad. Well, that kind of sounds, that's intuitive, right? We want money. Like, I don't like giving away money. I like money coming towards me. Ah, there you go. Money enters. So presumably he has nothing against someone from another town coming to his farmer's market, right? Okay, well, let's carry that logic to its conclusion. We currently live, by this time next week, this will be a community called COVIDville. And we only want money to come in. We don't want money going out. So if we had exports are good because money comes in. Meaning when people come to us to buy food, we're exporting out of our thing, they're bringing us money, that's good. So this is good. Imports, where we send money elsewhere for food to come in, money out, that's bad. So let's follow this conclusion. Suppose we keep doing that. We only export and we never import. Okay? True, money keeps coming in. I mean, it's raining. It's raining money. No money's going out. But do we consume money? We consume stuff, right? Food, toys, trucks, guns, fishing rods, blah, blah, blah. What's actually happening with goods here?
Well, you'd either have to be producing them yourself, which that's not really reality. Like, you can't have a factory in town for everything.
Yeah, should we make our own iPads?
Yeah.
Town of, yeah,
In defending his argument, he said in an agricultural setting.
yeah.
So branch out that other stuff, we're talking agricultural setting, it's his claim.
Yeah,
Defending his claim, but defending his agricultural setting.
yeah. I can't think of why ag would necessarily be different than anything else. There are some things like, yeah, to make an iPad, you need a big factory and stuff. You don't necessarily need that with the farms and stuff. But it's also true that there are some places that can grow some foods better than us. And there's also sometimes that to grow food better, you do need something bigger. So you're right. He was concentrating only on ag. And if we can make this thing only about ag, tell you what, we'll do.
We're saying only growing our own wheat, we aren't going to sell wheat to anyone else, or selling corn to anyone else. Our schools are only going to use our corn. That's what I believe his argument was, right?
Well, his argument was just money going out is bad. And that's what his argument boiled down to. That's what I heard. Let me finish with this, and then we can change it how we like. Suppose X is the amount of goods we can produce in COVIDville, or maybe just the total amount of food. We know we're exporting, so X is leaving. How much X is coming in? If we don't import, there's none. These two are the same thing. What we're doing is we're giving stuff away for free to other people. If we only export, never import, we're taking stuff, we're giving it away to other people, and we're not asking for anything in return because we're not importing. Does that kind of make sense? Now, whether you buy the argument or not, what you're seeing is the truth about this is really quite complex, isn't it? And think about what's also happening here. All this money's coming in. So COVIDville's awash in currency, but we actually have less goods here now because we're exporting and not importing. And so the price of everything goes up. So the money matters a little less. So this is a really complex issue. Not near as simple as Mr. John English's argument. And this is true for everything about the ethics of food. Everything's more complex. Now, I'm guessing Mr. English is not a locavore because of that argument. He uses that argument because he's a locavore. Does that make sense? And so suppose I went up to Mr. English, and I'm just brilliant prof, and I can explain things so well, and I convince him that argument's wrong. Will he cease to be a locavore?
Well, if he stood like that for years, and the community knows him as that, it would be really hard for him to switch over just because
Yeah.
convinced him that he was wrong.
Yeah. You start coming up with other reasons. You say, okay, but just like no matter whether you're a liberal or a conservative, your reasons that you list are not why you're, say, liberal. Those are just the reasons you give. If you're like really liberal, really conservative, and I've come to you and I show you that your main reason is just wrong, most of the time you're not going to say, okay, I'll just switch parties. You're going to say, okay, but, right?
Or you're going to defend your party even more.
Yeah, exactly. That does happen. You tend to be even more fervent in what you believe. This is not me making fun of Mr. English, not me making fun of you. I'm the exact same way. You know, you go to my church and you take those little wafers and you show me it's identical to bread, there's no Jesus in there, I'm still Catholic. All right, you can't prove me otherwise. Jesus is in there. Baby Jesus. Okay. It's the way we are. So the point there is Mr. English will then start saying, well, there's a lot of other reasons local food is good. It's better for the environment. Is it though? Anybody from California? Always one, yeah. So California, y'all can raise this beautiful, beautiful produce with almost, this is my impression, tell me if I'm wrong, with very little fungicides at all, because it's arid there. There's just not that many diseases. Where here, if you go to a local farm, they're using pesticides all over the place because there's fungal diseases everywhere. If you raise a squash plant in Stillwater, Oklahoma, you got to have insecticides all over that thing because of the squash bugs. Where I grew up in South Carolina, there's very little squash bugs. You don't need any insecticides at all. So is the squash plant more environmentally friendly if it's raised in Stillwater? Maybe not. But what about carbon footprints? The food, if we get it from Miss Whitmore's farm, it doesn't travel as far to get to the farmer's market as if we went all the way to California. But here's the thing. The carbon footprint of the food from California was lower to begin with. And, you know, it's like the carbon footprint of lamb going from New Zealand to England is lower than lamb raised in England staying in England. Just because it's so much more efficient to produce in New Zealand, even though you get all those food miles, it's still lower overall. So I'm not trying to be a jerk here. All I'm trying to say is this local foods movement is complex. You can take any argument and you can show that we really don't know whether it's good or bad. Or you can develop good arguments. This is and in the paper we talk about organic food like this, and I know it seems like I'm picking on foodies when I talk about this, and I'm not trying to, but it's just that in the market for ethical food, it's usually more foodie type people who are into this. Does that make sense? I hope I haven't made any enemies yet or anything. And so this is a rare class where in Ag Econ where you're encountering philosophers, especially people like Nietzsche. And so Nietzsche, you know, when he wrote Beyond Good and Evil, what he was talking about was like, a lot of these things that we think are good and evil, if we really look into it, they might not be as good as you think. But then he says, but who has the time to mess with all these perhapses? And so what he's saying here for our concerns is that, you know, let's take, I always think it's easy to explain this in terms of politics. Look, we got to vote for somebody, right? And you've got to have, at least a lot of us feel like we have to have a political opinion. Well, actually having a very, very informed political opinion that you could really defend well and that you believe is 100% true, that you know is 100% is really hard, at least I find. But you got to choose something. And so you make the best choice you can. Often it's our social factors that decide it. And you go out and you defend it and you don't question it very much. It's very uncomfortable to question a lot of those beliefs. And this comes to how we kind of look at life. And if you sit back and think about things, and we'll end on this. So just think with me for a minute here. Think about this world, and we're going to really philosophize here because we're talking about what's at the core of a lot of consumer decisions and who we are. Because remember, this is researching consumer food preferences. We're dealing with people here. And sometimes preferences are simple, like whether you like onions or not. But sometimes preferences are really complex, like whether we should buy local foods, whether we should buy organic. There was someone here who said they'd never buy non-GMO stuff. Who was that? Okay, some people go the opposite way. And think about this world in which we live. We as humans, we have to take these two worlds and put them together. One is just the objective world of science, things that we can document and know for certain. Engineering, physics, chemistry, things like that. But we also live in this social world that goes by a different set of rules. And the example I love that I use in the article is how you build a church. So to build a church, you have to use engineering, you have to use physics, otherwise the building comes down. So you have to use that objective world. But then there's these other things that come in. Most of the time, now the Catholic Church here in town doesn't do this, and I don't know why, I've never asked, but it used to be whenever you build a Catholic church, it always had to face east. Because there's a Bible verse that says that, like, Jesus will come from the west, or something like that. It was in the paper that you read, I'm sure. And so there's that rule about where Jesus has come from, and that goes by a different set of rules than those engineering rules about building the church. But we as humans, we have to put all these rules together, and we have to live a life where we mesh these rules that are sometimes contradictory together to form one identity, one person, one set of beliefs. And that's what the Lebenswelt is. German, which is why it's italicized, why it's capitalized. All nouns in German are capitalized. Lebenswelt just means the life world, the rules about our life, the things we hold to be true. We have to meld those two together. And so just think, just give me a couple ideas, and I'll let you go, about what is it about Mr. John English's world that tells him, inspires him, compels him to support the local foods movement. And when I'm saying what are some things, they can be some beliefs or some experiences he had as a child. And to help you answer that, think about what is it that really compels me and makes me to be a conservative or liberal, to have one religion or no religion, something like that. I know this is a hard thing to ask, but you read the article, you might be able to do it. What's happened in Mr. John English's life to make him a locavore?
He's encountered other people who have the same opinion as him, and then they just feed off of each other, and they don't surround themselves with people of different opinion, and if they do, they don't listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, he grew up in an environment where that was a truth given to him. We'll edit that out, don't worry. We'll edit all those things out. Yeah, that's what you saw about that pragmatic philosophy. You tend to, truth is what is useful to you. You do tend to accept the truths around you. And we don't like to admit it, but that's where we get a lot of things. What's something that may have happened in, maybe something Mr. John English saw that makes him support local food? Maybe something he's against. What's the difference between a local farmer and that farmer way out in California?
A local farmer, you can go see their farm if you want to half the time.
Is what?
You can go see their farm half the time.
Yeah, you can go see the farm. So, is there a reason I would trust a farmer more if I can go out and see their farm?
You can kind of see how the plants are doing.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like driving by fields that look withered, because then
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true or not, so don't hold me to it.
Right,
But
right.
when I pass cornfields where they look withered, but they're not even to the point that they're supposed to be at to harvest, I don't want to get my food from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that it's the farmer's fault, it's just
Right. Yeah, so I mean, imagine like you're the kind of person, you read in a newspaper about this large farm somewhere from another state that was regularly violating pesticide regulations or using water that they weren't supposed to. And you found out they were selling to these other big food processors that was selling to these other wholesalers, that then it wound up in a grocery store. And you look at that whole system and it seems like a machine, doesn't it? This big, big farm, a machine. They're selling to people they don't even know. And then it goes into this other machine. It ends up in the machine called Walmart. Whereas I've been to Connie Whitmore's farm 3 times. And she's taken me on tours there. And I know Connie. I don't feel like Connie's a machine. I don't feel like Whitmore Farm's a machine. Whitmore Farm sells at the farmer's market here. And so I just have this general attitude towards this thing called the industrial food system and this other attitude towards the farmer's market system. And that's not an unintelligent view, right? And I have lots of friends who kind of have those views. And so if that is what happened to Mr. John English, the way that he formed those beliefs is really complex, isn't it? And he really wouldn't be all that aware of exactly why he formed those beliefs, just like we're not exactly aware of why we're liberal or conservative. And so it ends up some of these views, and we'll leave on this, it's like, okay, that is William. His name is William. I can recognize him. And you ask me, how do I know that's William? I say, that is William, I can tell. Well, how do you know? Okay, well, and then I'll begin to describe William. What he looks like, his height, his facial features. Okay, those are reasons I'm able to identify William. But it's not like when people are passing by, my brain takes out those lists and says, does this person match these features? I just look at William and I know it's him. And I can't go into my mind and figure out exactly how I came to that conclusion. And a lot of times our beliefs, especially things with food ethics, are like that. We come to a conclusion about what we believe. We'll defend it, and we can defend it with reasons, but even we don't understand exactly how those beliefs are formed. That is the complexity of consumers. That's who you're selling to a lot of times. And we have to recognize that complexity if we're really going to understand who we're selling to. Okay, there's nothing do, no homeworks, anything. Go out, have a great weekend.